In hospitality, growth is often measured in numbers. More locations, more guests, and more moving parts to keep track of. But from a culinary perspective, growth introduces a different kind of challenge. Every new opening brings fresh variables, different environments, different rhythms, different hands executing the work, all with the potential to quietly shift the guest experience. And protecting consistency across all of that becomes the real measure of success.
It's always about consistency, understanding the constraints, understanding the variables, because there's so many variables in when you cook today.
Those variables don't just live on the line. They exist across sourcing, training, equipment, and operations. And as brands grow, what was once instinctive has to become deliberate, translated into systems that can reliably deliver the same outcome again and again. Scaling inevitably brings more complexity, and in the kitchen, complexity has a way of showing up on the plate, not always for the better.
Simplify before you scale, from understanding labor costs to food costs to even the innovation piece. You can't just keep adding and adding and adding and adding. That causes menu creep. That causes dilution to your brand.
Our guest this episode is Michael Sanfilippo, chef in residence at MarginEdge and former brand chef and head of innovation at Cava, where he helped scale one of the fastest growing restaurant brands in the country during a pivotal phase of expansion. I'm Rachel Stainton, and welcome to Science of Service, the podcast where we uncover the strategies behind building successful hospitality businesses. Whether you're a seasoned operator or just starting out, you'll find insights and inspiration to help you thrive. And today, we're exploring scaling through a culinary lens, how consistency is baked in, how systems are built, and why simplifying, not adding more, is often the key to growing successfully. For many who find their home in our industry, their first step often comes through the doors of a global giant. Well, that was true for Michael, whose start came early, working for one of the biggest food service operations. It was really his family that nurtured his first instincts. Thanks to his dad, an Italian wine importer, Michael understood hospitality as something rooted in generosity, connection, and the people gathered around the table.
Hospitality was always in our household. After soccer games with my friends and things like that, my dad would always have like a big bowl of pasta for all of us to like chow down on. And it was always awesome to see. It was always like a community for us. And I think that like speaks to like the main point of hospitality for me. And I wanted to be in the kitchens. And I think my first job was actually in Domino's when I was 14 years old. Domino's pizzas. I was slinging pizzas in the back of Domino's, eating those little cinnamon bun, little twist things that they had.
Yeah. Addictive.
Yeah, very addictive. Lots of sugar, but it was great. But it was mostly my father and the way that he like brought everyone together. I was attending business school at the University of North Florida, and I wanted to pursue culinary. I was working in kitchens at this time, mostly hotel kitchens. I was working for the IHG Crown Plaza in Jacksonville. And I told my dad I want to go to culinary school. He's like, where are you going to go? I was like, I was following one of my ex-girlfriends, and I was like, let me go to, the Art Institute of Washington. It's here. Let me get it done. He's like, all right, just go, whatever. And when I was younger, my mother passed away when I was 9 years old. And there's this book that we always had at the house, and we never really opened. It was Jacques Le Pen, Method of Technique. And my dad one day opened it while I was in culinary school, and a little note fell out, a little piece of paper. And it was my mom's handwriting with my name on it. So I think it was like a calling naturally. Yeah. So I think that's why it made me stay, because it gives me like really good memories of my parents, mostly my mother.
That early pull toward kitchens would become the start of a career that's taken Michael across roles, across brands, and across a changing industry. From culinary school to hotel kitchens and into the fast-moving world of scaling restaurant concepts, each step added new layers, new systems, new pressures, and new ways of thinking about what it means to cook and to lead. But underneath it all, the foundation never really changed. Scaling successfully demands efficiency and consistency, but those qualities can only take hold when they're built on something solid. And Michael's foundation was shaped early through family, memory, and the simple act of bringing people together. It's an imprint he's carried with him throughout his career, preserving that human signal even as the roles grew bigger and the operations scaled around him.
I think the turning point for me was actually hotels, because they're already on such a massive scale. And to see like as a whole, like you're delivering hospitality, you have to be, you're delivering excellence every single day. It's the gold standard. Especially I work for the Four Seasons, and that's like, I feel like the top of the creme. Like that is
It's the Four Seasons.
it's the Four Seasons. You can't mess up.
Yeah.
When someone comes in VIP, it's like VIP. And then I worked entremet at Bourbon Steak under Adam Sobel, and you're just sitting there, and it's like that's a side station, and you're cooking everything a la minute, and it's like it's got to be perfect every single time. And I think that was like the turning point. There was like no recipe cards at the time. So it's like everything was done by like motions. And I memorized like my hand motions. I memorized like I was finishing deglazing pans and adding truffle oils to certain things and like scooping, portioning things. I think it all came with muscle memory.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a huge turning point for me where I was like, I think it's a lot easier if we wrote this stuff down. Or like, I don't have to come in and feel like that's why we have prep lists. That's why we have order guides. That's why we have recipe cards. There, it's just like you had your notebook, you wrote this stuff down. You listened to the previous cook that was in that station and you were like, are you sure this is correct? And then chef would come by like, try this. So I think it came to like understanding like I want to be the best that I can be. I don't know how many little notebooks I have written down of like all the recipes or anything that I like cooked with at restaurants, but it's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about how does that look in your work today? Those early learnings in the hotels, how's that impacting your work today?
I think it built a foundation for myself. I think it was like I pushed myself to be very organized. I pushed myself to be very disciplined. I always wanted to make sure things stayed consistent. Once you put out your best product of like a truffle mac and cheese, you always wanted to taste like that. If you put out, the best ratio of potatoes of like Yukon Golds and Idaho potatoes, even searing a piece of steak, you always want to make sure you have the right amount of salt. And the cook time is always the same. The heat level or the ember levels of the grill are always really hot and consistent. So I strive for my vision of perfection. It's always about consistency, understanding the constraints, and really going back and waving in and understanding the variables, because there's so many variables in when you cook today.
And on the topic of perfection, I wonder if you can tell me a small detail in a restaurant that like most guests would never notice, but when you notice it, it drives you crazy or you're very quietly impressed by it.
Okay. Could I make this a two-part?
Yeah.
Well, one, dust. Dust is everywhere, and guests don't really see dust. Dust on light fixtures, it drives me insane. I'm like, oh my goodness. Yes, baseboards. I'm like, why? Just go and wipe it down. And then if you're going through, a fast casual setting, you see smallwares, they're very inconsistent, or it's not the right one that was supposed to be there. It's like guests are not going to notice that. So, but you notice that, and you're like, this has got to be a training moment where you get to teach and train someone on it. But it's mostly that.
Yeah. Anything that you're quietly impressed by?
Quietly impressed by. Let's see. How sometimes, I talked about cleanliness, can't really say the dust, but like, line sweeps, the floors being clean, using the correct containers, the visuals of certain things I'm always impressed by. Yeah.
The details.
Yeah, the details. It speaks more about the brand too. So it's like their stations are wiped down. You're like, nice. There's no food on the floor. You're like, this person's on top of it. So it's good.
Dust and dirty floors will kill an appetite pretty quickly. Nothing says spectacular, give me 14 of them like a side of baseboard grime. But real discipline runs deeper than a quick wipe down. As Michael learned the ropes, he doubled down on the habits that actually drive consistency. The notebooks, the routines, the relentless focus on getting it right every single time. He understood that discipline becomes documentation and instinct becomes infrastructure. That mindset, the belief that excellence should be repeatable alongside his hospitality foundations, eventually brought him to Cava, where he stepped in as brand chef during a pivotal phase of growth. Already a successful brand, Cava was entering a new era after bringing another concept into the fold, creating the opportunity for Michael to apply those lessons at scale.
I feel like the brand was already very successful. The founders, they're really driven in keeping the food at such a high quality and high standard. And they talk a lot about the heart, health, and humanity in their concept, and they really stood by it. When I started at the fast casual side of it, because I was at their full service side, fast casual side, we just did the acquisition of Zoe's. We really wanted to keep the core of the culture within the brand and inside all the teams at work. You're talking about like marketing, brand. We wanted to keep everyone together and keep building that family. I think for me, that role for it to be successful is like we all work together. We really created a structure for Culinary. We built like a brand ethos. And what that did was like we talked about like what ingredients we would use, what ingredients we would never use, and how it would work. And it was kind of crazy because a lot of it was operational at first, and then it was innovation afterwards. So we really focused on operational challenges inside the brand or inside the restaurant to see where we can really focus on. So I think it came down to like recipe cards. It came down to like the innovation pathway. It came down to understanding smallwares. It came down to a lot of like these small, minute things that a lot of people overlook.
Yeah.
And it really came with developing this flavor wheel and having a single source of truth. So it was really about that.
Yeah. It's like clearing the dust before you can start the more creative process.
Yeah. Wiping down your baseboards, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Clean space, clean mind, right?
Yes. Like I said, we built the Culinary ethos, brand identity. We said we wanted to be in the Mediterranean. We put up ourselves in that swim lane, and then we put up our guardrails. We would say like we would never use soy. We would never use certain ingredients that would ever touch the line. And then from there, we would push the envelope. We always talked about looking from Greece to the east, and it's like the Levant. You know, there's things that in the Mediterranean that you don't realize is part of that. It's like Turkey, Lebanon, even parts of North Africa. We wanted to touch the different spice levels and all that. And I think we established that realm of what we wanted to do, and we put that up as our guardrail. And then from there, it was like, how can we just make things better? We use a term called making the familiar fantastic. So we would take something that's familiar to people and make it fantastic, like ranch. We'll just use ranch as the base. And we made a Za'atar ranch at one of our concepts, and we really like honed in on that. And that was one of the ideas that we really discussed and tried to like basically put ourselves in these guardrails and just stay within them.
So what does it actually take to turn that brand idea into something that's consistent, that shows up in every bowl every day? Because obviously you've got a lot of elements going into a bowl like at Cava, for example. How do you keep that consistency? Like, what is the practical way to do that?
So I think for me, consistency shows up with the execution. You know, you have the marketing piece, you have the supply chain piece / sourcing piece, and then you have the culinary piece, and then you have the operational piece. It starts with a blue sky innovation. And then from blue sky innovation, it comes to reality. And then we test at a single restaurant location. And then from there, we like to see how well it works out operationally. We ask our team members to break it. What I mean by break it is like, tell us what happens if it's like overcooked or sitting on the line too long. If there's too much vinegar, what is the waste of the, you know, something pulling out of the product or the green, things like that. It's constantly testing. It's constantly, we phase it out properly. We had a protocol that we wanted to go, even if it's a single ingredient, we really focused on that single ingredient. We made sure that no matter what market it went into, it tasted the same in all the markets, but it came down to first the sourcing piece, the blue sky innovation piece, and making sure that it was consistent throughout. And then we built out that marketing piece behind it to really speak about that product.
When it comes to scaling successfully, consistency and standards get talked about a lot, but maintaining them day in, day out across dozens and hundreds of kitchens, that takes real focus. At Cava, that meant putting clear guardrails in place, defining exactly what the brand stood for and how it showed up on the menu, what belonged on the plate, and, just as importantly, what didn't. It gave the team clarity. As Michael said, they had swim lanes to operate in, meaning they could move fast without drifting into territory that diluted the brand. And innovation was equally grounded in discipline. Instead of just testing for taste or novelty, they tested for reality. Stress testing dishes operationally, breaking them on purpose, understanding how ingredients behaved across different kitchens, different teams, and different markets. But even with the right standards in place, new operational challenges are always waiting, especially as growth accelerates.
There's a lot of things actually, or measuring units, you know, working in the imperial versus metric. I think you're going to have a better understanding of metric because there's less variance and it helps with getting the end product to be consistent. If you're in one restaurant location, we'll say in Florida, and then you go to another restaurant location in New York and it's producing the same product. And it's like, I think that's the key. Another one is language too, and simplicity. Language, what I mean is that all the recipe cards have the same language. The simplicity too in the recipe cards. So this is really ops driven or operational driven. And to really back down on that is that you're looking and reading recipe cards, you're making sure it's short to the point, and not too many steps, because if a team member looks at it or someone that's not really great at cooking, it's their first time working in restaurants, they see these recipe cards with 15, 16 steps, it's really kind of scary. So you wanted to make sure that you have, even if like you have a dressing, we'll use this as an example, you want to make sure the same steps are in each dressing. So it's a technique that you're not doing multiple things. The only thing you're changing is the speed as a variable or time as a variable to kind of like help them execute this consistency. You want to make sure you start with dry ingredients and you work your way with an emulsifier. And then from there, you're always emulsifying everything at the end with oil being your last ingredient. So it's like really understanding the steps of order of operations and the steps of the recipe cards to kind of help, like you hone it down, you have the same technique, everything is the same tool moving forward.
Yeah. And you talked a little bit about like switching to metric versus like volume or imperial, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how that came about, how you guys realized that you needed to have this standardized approach and what problems it solved by making the switch to metric?
I feel everyone in the world uses metric except for the United States. Working in fine dining settings, I feel like all these other chefs and restaurants or single off restaurants or one off restaurants, they use metric.
Yeah.
They don't really use the imperial system. And so why change? There's more about consistency. There's more about understanding. There's less change of variables. I give you a crazy thing that we saw is you take 1 tablespoon of Diamond Crystal kosher salt.
Yeah.
And then you take 1 tablespoon of Morton's and then you put them on the scale. They're totally different.
Yeah.
So the salinity level of something so simple can just change. Something can be too salty or bland. It's just crazy that we were seeing so much inconsistencies with our food. So we wanted to be more consistent. And what that really hones in on is you understand that it's better for the operators, even though there's a variance piece that you can play with, plus or minus certain things with, dry ingredients, salt, and also liquids. But what that helps with is like really honing in on your food costs of what things actually cost. But when you work with imperial, it's like you use 1 ounce or a cup, there's too much variance going on.
Yeah.
And everyone doesn't have the same cup weight, or you scoop, you compact your flour in 1 cup. It's going to be different every single time. There's nothing to it that's consistent. Maybe the consistency piece is that it's different every time.
Yeah. And I think especially too, like when you're working with fresher ingredients, like less processed things, there's that variability within the ingredients themselves, like seasonality, right? Like strawberries in the summer, strawberries in the winter, very different things. So like,
yeah, jalapenos during different times have different heat levels. Even, it sounds crazy, but even like red pepper flakes too, something that's a dry ingredient, it's got a different spice level between different packs, so it's like wild to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Limiting those variables as much as possible.
Yeah.
Was there a specific operational change that had like a big impact on either flavor consistency or cost controls? We're kind of looking to talk about like variance control and gold standard testing.
I think for us, it was the gold standard testing. It was portion control. It was, you standardize build order as well in bowls and the way that the recipe cards are built. And it was about yield awareness to understand like what the raw inputs were versus the cooked inputs, I think are very lost in food cost. And it also, like a lot of things too, that sometimes we don't realize is that transferring a finished component, like a dressing, into a squeeze bottle, you have a yield loss. And then you also have a yield loss in the squeeze bottle because you're not fully using everything. So I think that's the biggest impact for cost control. For flavor consistency, when supply chain or when procurement sends different things to different regions, we saw big stuff. And another one is we can talk about cooking as well. Using a chicken and overfilling your grill has a longer cook time versus, filling your grill properly and staging it where things are not overlapping and you're staying within that guardrail of or the technique of saying, okay, this is actually going to take us 14 minutes versus the 25 minutes plus the cleanup of that as well. So I think it's like that piece, the flavor consistency piece with the supply chain being, you have to make sure procurement and supply chain are on it, because you can order oregano, but there's two different types of oregano. There's Mexican oregano and there's Greek Mediterranean oregano. We saw that as a growing pain. So you want to make sure that, the product that you're getting is the gold standard, you're sourcing it properly, and it's always consistent. And if they do sub it out, you make sure you test that sub. You make sure that you're really on top of it and have that structure on an operational structure and, culinary structure that you're testing these things. And it goes through like all these stage gates where it's like, okay, can this be replaced? Yes or no? Does it taste like the gold standard? No, it doesn't. So this is not a sub. So I think that's big.
This is where great kitchens separate themselves from the rest. Consistency at scale doesn't start on the line. It starts long before that in how a dish is designed, documented, and taught. At Cava, every component had to earn its place and hold its own in the chaos of a real kitchen, across shifts, across teams, and under pressure. That meant recipe cards became precision tools, clear, simple, and built around technique. So whether it was a dressing, a protein, or a finishing element, the outcome wasn't left to interpretation. And measurement played a huge role in that. Moving to the metric system gave the team control. Small variations in volume, how tightly something's packed, how it's scooped, even the type of salt used can shift flavor, texture, and cost in measurable ways. Weight removes that ambiguity, and precision ensures every guest gets the same experience. From yield awareness, so teams understand exactly what they're gaining and losing at each step, to technique, where something as simple as how a grill is loaded can impact cook time, flavor, and ultimately food cost. For Michael, scaling culinary excellence demands control, building systems where quality is engineered into every detail. Of course, things get even more interesting in a build-your-own model where guests are effectively co-creating the final dish, and the system has to work no matter what combination comes down the line.
In a full service model, I want to talk about too, it's like you can do each dish. It's fixed, right? So you have, the item level COGS story in that, but in a fast casual model, it lives in a blended performance across the menu. So you have to categorize everything. If it's a base, your greens or grains, your mains or slash proteins, you have to focus on a blended COGS, more on like the dressing side, the topping side, or the finishing topping side. One, you create a recipe, right? Then it comes down to sourcing. Then it comes down to the COGS and implication of things. If things are too expensive, does the recipe have to change? You have to put yourself in these fine margins and saying, okay, we don't want it to exceed this much per portion. And if we do, what do we do and how do we change it? It could be like a decrease of the most expensive ingredient on there, or it could be you're looking at it and be like, okay, so if we now switch to this olive oil versus that olive oil, what does that do for us? So I think it's understanding all the ingredients that are composed in this. And then you talk about guardrails, right? Or in a box, you want to innovate within that box. So you already know your goals that you can't exceed this point, this cost per dressing, or this cost per topping. And then you want to make sure that it goes through these rigorous tests where you're weighing it out constantly, you're capturing this, and then you're using the correct smallware for that, and then you're getting what it is that it's supposed to be costed for.
And when you introduce a new, like an LTO or something new to the menu, what are you evaluating beyond just whether or not the taste is good?
How it goes well with everything else. So if you're running in an LTO anywhere, I think you want to make sure it's within, the flavor and it speaks with everything else and it doesn't overtake anything or oversaturate certain things. I think it's just more on lines of this flavor is actually kind of building and being composed with all the food. And I think that's like a huge home run. You're not just tasting this dressing or this topping. It's working with everything else. And I think that especially in the fast casual setting, that's really hard to do, because if you add one bad ingredient to it, you can destroy someone's bowl or someone's experience.
Is it too, because I know you kind of talked about like keeping a small pantry, keeping a small SKU, right? Like, is it innovating within that, or, pulling in a new random ingredient that's,
You can always pull in random ingredients. It has to be within your guardrails, your swim lane. It can't just be something that's just like way out there. With that, you want to make sure it's cross-utilized. So we'll use a spice, for instance. You want to make sure you cross-utilize it within almost, I would say, within the toppings and the dressings. I think it would, if you cross-utilize that, you're building a flavor note and a flavor profile, and it's helping. It's reducing costs. The volume of it goes up. It helps you with more of purchasing power as well. So I think that's like a huge note on that.
Yeah. And then it's keeping the flavor consistency too, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. What role would you say testing and experimentation play in a company's growth? And how did you know when a new item was ready to scale?
When everyone at the table liked it. No, seriously. You put down 5 or 6 iterations of one dressing, and you can see how well it eats in the bowl or how well it eats with each component. And then once everyone's quiet, they're like really like looking at each other. You're like, oh, knocked it out of the park. I know that everyone likes it.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the most expensive one. They're like, we want this. And be like, how do you figure to get it down? I'm like, oh my gosh, really?
You're like, oh, all right.
All right, here we go.
Yeah. But that goes back to what you were saying before of like building that foundation of like the blended cogs, having everything met on kind of like a systemic level first before bringing in that creative, right? So then those 5 options that you do give to people, even if it is the most expensive one, it's still falling within the confines of what it needs to, right?
Yeah. And then it goes even further than that. It goes into like a controlled testing environment where, constantly making it, getting the portion, understanding the cogs, like we said. Can we actually source this ingredient? Is this, that? And then we do a CLT, which is central location testing, where we're having people come in, we're running it, seeing what they say about it. It's just promoted at one location. And then from there, it builds. And then you want to do like sometimes a market test. And from the market test, it could potentially go into more of a regional test, a bigger, where you're seeing 2 different markets compete and seeing how well it's being ordered. And then from there, a lot of times brands like to do a fleet-wide test.
Yeah. I'm a little bit curious about the sourcing aspect of things. Like, I know it's not as big of an issue now as it was like during the height of the pandemic, but obviously like supply chain shortages, things like that. How do larger brands control when you've got, a store in New York, a store in California? How does that work, making sure that the product is consistent across all of them?
It's a great question. So there's a few answers to that. One, what a lot of it comes down to getting these products in-house first and working with them, like every single ingredient, and seeing how, and then when you develop a gold standard, there's specs on things. For instance, you probably we'll talk about chicken because there's so many different chicken farms out there, but there's only one, I believe this is correct. There's only one breed of chicken that the United States grows. Like everyone eats the same type of chicken. I believe it's called the Cox, COX chicken breed. And we standardize that, meaning like we ask for a certain type of bird, size, weight, and all. And then from there it was grown, right, in different regions of the United States. And then that product was shipped to these distribution centers, and these distribution centers sent them out. When it comes to dry ingredients or sourcing things like salts,
Time and Crystal Coastal.
Yeah.
Just say that 5 times fast.
Yeah, I know. Morton's kosher salt, that is readily available everywhere and it's consistent.
Yeah.
So you're not too worried about that. It's also produce. Produce is a big one. The act of God, the act of nature can really distort things. And sometimes you have to say you're out of it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but it happens that way. And you talk to your growers, your farmers, you talk to the produce side of the supply chain and say, hey, what can we do and get ahead of this problem about romaine or this problem about, really stemmy baby spinach or really stemmy or yellow off turn arugula? How do you get ahead of all that? You're not going to always win. You're going to have a lot of inconsistent problems when you're working with a lot of fresh ingredients.
Yeah.
You're going to see less inconsistency with dry ingredients, but you want to make sure that the source of things, and you always want to talk to the people that are one doing this for you or making it or growing it for you, that they're making sure that they're still on your gold standard that you want.
When it comes to scaling and maintaining the gold standard, you also have to make sure you're not breaking the bank. And as Michael just laid out, that takes a laser focus on the details. Growth means the small stuff isn't small anymore. A slightly heavy pour, a bit of yield loss, or a dropped pan add up fast, multiplied across hundreds of kitchens and thousands of orders a day. That's the kind of detail that separates good brands from great ones. So we've put together a recap in the show notes to help connect the dots and save you from trying to decode your own voice notes later that just say metric, yield, salt. But before we wrap up, we asked Michael to zoom out. After working hands-on with operators across the country, helping them organize, realign, refine, and scale, what's the blind spot he sees most often?
This is a great question. I look at like recipe cards first, a piece of equipment, how they're being utilized, understanding it. I ask questions about the single source of truth. I look at like all their, if they have a lot of ingredients, I'll be like, you got to look and do a SKU rationalization. Reduce SKUs will help cut costs. You know, a lot of these are not being cross-utilized properly. And then you look at their recipe cards and see if there is like a standardization of yields, of recipes, execution, the same language. How's their labeling? How's their storage? Things, you know, walk in and it's a mess. You know that they're not really on top of things and they're probably not following the first in and first out rule. They're just grabbing and seeing what's right there. Organization, I think, is the big one for me.
Yeah.
And then standardizing something so simple as a tasting, like taste your food all the time and be aware of like what is happening and going back to what person prepped this labeling piece, right? Okay, so why did this get prepped incorrectly? Did you not follow the recipe? And if you have all these things, I think you can move faster and fix your infrastructure quicker.
Yeah. As you're now consulting with operators across different concepts, different sizes, what is the one piece of advice that you find yourself offering to them most often?
Simplify before you scale. Less is more. I think that people, it's honestly, you have to tighten everything on all ends, from understanding labor costs to food costs to even the innovation piece. You can't just keep adding and adding and adding and adding. That causes menu creep. That causes just like dilution to your brand. I think it's like really understanding and honing in on who you are and how to build from that, have a brand identity, stay within these swim lanes and guardrails that you're going to build for yourself, build yourself a culinary ethos, a brand concept or, you know, concept essence, and then focus on that and rebuild your brand that way. McDonald's does it every 10 years. They rebuild themselves. And it's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to like really take pride in and who you are. The market is always shifting. The economics are always shifting. So it's like, how do you shift with economics and how do you understand that?
Yeah.
You know, generations do change.
Yeah.
So it's like, how do you capture the younger crowd in things? Like, what do they eat?
Yeah. Like Gen Z not drinking alcohol, right? Very different.
Wow, what is that?
Do you have a story to illustrate the simplify advice that you give?
Yeah. I helped this restaurant that's been around for 30 years. And I didn't want to take away from what they had, their sauces that they did. So what I did was I really worked with the owner and we talked about how to speed up things and one, have a better food consistency piece of it. And what we developed was that they would make this rosé sauce and they would pour in like half a quart of heavy cream in a steaming pot and then add a little drop of tomato sauce to it. And that was their rosé sauce. I was like, oh, let's fix this. So what we did was we batched it out, already a batched out rosé sauce for them. And all the team member had to do, or the cook had to do, was literally take a ladle of this, put it in. You don't have to have a ripping pan, heats up, you finish it with the pasta or another ingredient that they needed that goes into it, toss it, put it in a plate. And we saw a huge reduction in food costs because of the waste of heavy cream they were doing. They're just constantly reducing heavy cream and adding more. It's like, no, you don't need to do that. So I think that's a really good one. Something so simple, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Final question.
Oh, man.
If you had to pick one superpower for running restaurants, either like a perfect palate or having like a perfect P&L vision, which one would win for you and why?
Can it be both?
Yeah. Or something else entirely.
I don't know. This is too hard. I want them all. I think really honing in on P&Ls, maybe calling Georgina and having her teach me more. No, it's systems. I think I would love to just have the best technique out there because I think that's what everyone strives for is the best technique of execution.
And do you mean technique in terms of like efficiency or consistency or?
Efficiency, consistency, understanding variables, really honing in on the time piece of it, blending dressings, cooking times, temperature piece, what gives you the crispiest or the best seared. I know we talk about seared steak, but it's like technique. Equipment is ever evolving for us. And it's like, you want to be part of that, the technology that's part of that equipment. Like you now have rationales, you have, these amazing combi ovens that can do so much. I think if you understand those pieces of technology, I think you can stride even better and set yourself up for better success.
Understanding variables, developing culinary consistency, creating efficiencies. Maybe that is Michael's superpower. The ability to see that technique, replicability, and attention to detail go far beyond administrative chores. They're levers that protect the plate, deliver on the brand promise, and keep guests coming back for more. Excellence at scale doesn't happen by accident. It's built through discipline, strong systems, and the willingness to simplify before you grow. Most brands don't fail in one dramatic moment. They drift. A few extra SKUs, a recipe that lives in someone's head, a process that works until it doesn't. My thanks to Michael for showing us that when discipline meets clarity, scaling becomes sustainable for the team, the brand, and every guest who walks through the door. If you'd like the demi-glace of today's key insights, concentrated and ready to use, they're simmering over in the show notes. And if you know an operator trying to expand without losing the recipe that made them great, this is one worth passing along. I'm Rachel Stainton, and if you enjoyed this episode of Science of Service, please rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.